It was the kind of small town where everybody knew the rhythm of one another's lives when the diner opened, when the quarry trucks rolled out, when porch lights dimmed one by one across the hills. On the evening of April 17, 2009, 19-year-old Megan Ellis was one of the last people to leave the Clearwater Diner, a squat brick building off Highway 47, its neon sign flickering against the dark. She'd been on her feet for 10 hours, serving truckers and night shift workers, smiling through the exhaustion. Her last customer that night remembered her joking about wanting to get home before her mom started packing everything wrong for their weekend trip to Patoka Lake. She clocked out just before 10:40 p.m., stuffed her tips into her purse, and told a coworker, "I'll text when I get home." She never did. The next morning, her mother, Linda Ellis, noticed Megan's bedroom still made up, her duffel bag lying open and empty on the bed. The house was silent, save for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the chirp of morning robins outside. At first, she thought her daughter might have stayed with a friend, maybe fallen asleep after her shift. But by 8 a.m., when no one had seen Megan and her phone went straight to voicemail, the easy explanations began to dissolve. By 9:12 a.m., Linda was standing in her kitchen, clutching the cordless phone, whispering through tears to the 911 dispatcher, "My daughter didn't come home last night. She's 19. She always calls." The first responding deputy, Mark Latham, arrived 20 minutes later. He'd known Megan since she was a kid, remembered her helping her mom at church picnics, handing out lemonade with a shy smile. Inside the house, nothing looked disturbed, no signs of struggle. Her work uniform was missing, along with her keys and purse, but her phone charger was still on the nightstand. Latham asked the usual questions: boyfriends, arguments, changes in behavior. Linda shook her head. "She's just steady. She doesn't go off anywhere without saying something." By midday, the search had begun. Deputies canvassed the short 6-mile stretch between the diner and the Ellis home, a route Megan had driven countless times. It wound past a stretch of farmland, a small industrial park, and then dipped near a set of abandoned limestone quarries that had been fenced off for years. Volunteers on ATVs rode the shoulders, scanning ditches and creek beds. Officers checked gas stations, convenience stores, and the Shell station on the corner, all equipped with outdated security cameras. None of them captured a silver Pontiac Sunfire leaving town that night. By early afternoon, concern had hardened into fear. Clearwater had seen disappearances before, but never someone like Megan. She wasn't running from anything. No history of mental health issues, no troubled relationships, no reason to vanish into thin air. Her friends flooded Facebook with pleas for help. One post read, "Please keep an eye out for Megan's car, silver Pontiac, dent on the rear bumper, Indiana plate 9YV384. At 3:15 p.m., officers received their first potential lead. A farmer off Haven Quarry Road reported seeing a small silver car around 11 p.m. the night before, parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. He thought maybe someone had hit a deer, something common along that stretch, but when he drove back an hour later, the car was gone. Deputies rushed to the area. Tire impressions were faint, already distorted by morning dew. They traced them for about 30 yards until the prints vanished near the edge of the old quarry fence line. By sundown, search and rescue teams were combing through every back road and drainage ditch. Bloodhounds were brought in from a nearby county. They caught a faint scent near the diner's back parking lot but lost it along Highway 47. That night, local divers were called to check the quarry ponds, despite the poor visibility. The water was deep, nearly 90 feet in some sections, and layered with debris from decades of mining operations. The divers returned empty-handed, shaken by the murky conditions. One of them later told reporters, "It's like descending into black ink down there. You can't see your own hand." As midnight passed, the community gathered outside the diner holding candles, praying for some sign. Linda stood apart from the crowd, gripping a framed photo of her daughter Megan at 17, in her prom dress, a soft smile frozen in time. The sheriff addressed the group briefly, reminding everyone to stay hopeful and to report anything unusual, no matter how small. But as searchlights swept across the dark water of the quarry and the wind rustled through the cornfields, there was a feeling that something terrible had already happened. Back at the Ellis home, Linda sat in the kitchen surrounded by Megan's friends, each clinging to their phones, reloading social media posts, waiting for updates that never came. Around 2 a.m., Deputy Latham stopped by again, exhaustion etched into his face. He told her they'd found nothing so far, no tire debris, no broken glass, no sign of a struggle anywhere along her route. Linda asked him a question he didn't know how to answer. How does a car just disappear? In the days that followed, the investigation deepened. Troopers expanded the search radius to 30 miles, checking nearby lakes, rivers, and highway rest stops. Volunteers walked the banks of Clearwater Creek, dragging poles through the underbrush. Local TV crews arrived, interviewing friends and family, their cameras catching tearful faces and the reflection of patrol lights in the water. Every night, Linda left the porch light burning. Just in case, she told reporters softly, she finds her way back. By the end of that first week, the case had already begun to feel different, heavier, colder. The Graham Sheriff's Office issued a missing person bulletin statewide, labeling Megan's disappearance suspicious but undetermined. Rumors started swirling. Maybe she'd been abducted. Maybe she ran away. Maybe it was something darker. But to those who knew her best, none of it made sense. Then, one afternoon, a pair of divers returned from Haven Quarry looking shaken. They hadn't found the car, but they had found something strange. A fresh scrape mark on a submerged rock face, like metal dragging against stone. It was impossible to date, and the quarry was too deep to fully inspect. But the detail stuck with investigators. If Megan had somehow missed a turn and gone off the road that night, she could be down there, invisible beneath 40 feet of dark water. The problem was they couldn't prove it. The quarry's ownership had changed hands years earlier, and unstable conditions made further searches dangerous. So, they marked the area, filed a report, and moved on. That night, as rain began to fall over Clearwater, Linda Ellis stood at her window watching the glow of her porch light reflect in the wet asphalt. It had been 7 days since her daughter vanished, and still, not a trace. The town that once buzzed with search efforts had grown quiet. Even the crickets outside seemed to hold their breath. And somewhere beyond that silence, past the diner, past the fields, down a narrow gravel road lay a stretch of black water that no one dared to look into for long. Because deep down, even then, people were starting to wonder if the answer to what happened to Megan Ellis was already waiting there, hidden beneath the surface, just out of sight. Within 2 days of Megan Ellis's disappearance, Clearwater felt different. The diner parking lot, usually filled with late-night truckers and high school kids, had become a gathering place for strangers holding printed flyers and coffee cups gone cold. Every telephone pole and gas pump bore her face. 19 years old, light brown hair, a small scar above her left eyebrow. Beneath the photo, 3 words in bold black letters: missing last seen April 17th. At first, investigators leaned on the most logical explanation. Maybe Megan had left town on her own. She was young, restless, maybe tired of small-town routines. But that theory broke apart fast. Her purse, paycheck, and car keys were still in her locker at the diner. Her phone hadn't been used since 10:42 p.m., the night she vanished. Her bank card showed no activity, and there was nothing to suggest she'd planned to go anywhere. Detectives interviewed everyone who'd worked with her that night. The manager remembered her wiping down tables, humming softly under her breath the same song she always played in her car on the drive home. Her co-worker, a college freshman named Lacey, said she seemed normal, even cheerful. She said she couldn't wait for that weekend trip, Lacey recalled later. And then, she just disappeared. By the 48-hour mark, the case had already taken on a strange rhythm, a sense that something very ordinary had gone terribly wrong. Police checked every mile between the diner and her home. Helicopters flew low over fields. Volunteers on foot moved through culverts and fence lines, dragging flashlights through weeds that hadn't been touched in months. Nothing. Then came the first real lead. A truck driver named Ray Holland called the sheriff's office after seeing the missing posters. He told investigators that around 11:15 p.m., on the night Megan disappeared, he'd noticed a silver car parked on the shoulder near Haven Quarry Road, its hazard lights flashing. He slowed down but didn't stop. Figured they had car trouble, he said. Didn't see anyone outside, though. Just the lights. Officers drove out there immediately. The stretch of Haven Quarry was narrow and badly maintained, the kind of back road that looked harmless in interesting accidents, they said. Cars sliding off the road during rainstorms, kids daring each other to get close to the edge. But for some reason, the pattern felt too familiar. Detectives couldn't ignore those murmurs. They combed through old case files: a missing man in 1997, a young couple in 2003 whose car was never recovered. It all circled the same area. But each time, they ran into dead ends. The quarry had changed ownership multiple times. Safety logs were inconsistent, and maps were incomplete. What had once been a local industry had turned into a forgotten hazard, fenced off and overgrown. While investigators struggled to find something concrete, Megan's family lived in a quiet nightmare. Her mother, Linda, refused to leave town. Every morning, she stood in front of the window waiting for patrol cars to pass, hoping one would slow down with news. Her son, Daniel, dropped out of college to help search full-time, stapling flyers across 3 counties. He'd drive for hours every night, scanning ditches with a flashlight, convinced he might find something everyone else missed. Detectives followed up on every call. Some tips bordered on desperate. One woman swore she saw Megan in a Walmart parking lot near Louisville, turned out to be a stranger. Another caller claimed Megan was being held at a nearby truck stop, an unverified rumor that wasted 3 days of manpower. And yet, through the noise, one detail kept resurfacing. Almost everyone last saw her heading toward that same quarry road. As weeks passed, the initial frenzy of search efforts began to fade. The sheriff's office had exhausted its resources. The local news cycle moved on. But Linda refused to let go. She met with detectives weekly, pressing for updates. One day, an investigator quietly told her that if Megan's car had gone into the quarry, it might never be found. The water was too deep, the equipment too limited. Linda listened without saying a word, then looked him in the eye and said, "You drain it, you'll find her." That sentence became her anchor. By early summer, the case had split into theories. The first was abduction, that someone had picked her up after her car broke down. But there were no signs of a struggle, no tire tracks indicating another vehicle pulled over nearby. The second was the runaway theory, resurrected, but even her closest friends dismissed it. Megan didn't have the means or the motive. The third was the one no one wanted to voice aloud, that she'd had an accident, that she was still out there somewhere, trapped in her car beneath that water. As the heat rose, the quarry grew more still. Search teams scaled back. Reporters stopped calling. Linda spent her evenings on the porch, staring toward the direction of Haven Quarry, replaying her daughter's last night over and over, the clock-out time, the rain that started later that night, the unlit turns between the diner and home. Each detail felt like both a clue and a taunt. Months passed this way, marked by vigils instead of birthdays, silence instead of answers. In August, a private search group offered to scan the quarry with portable sonar equipment. They did find faint shapes under the surface, objects that could have been cars, or rocks, or nothing. The results were inconclusive, the equipment too basic to tell. Still, it reignited hope. For a few days, the news spread that maybe, just maybe, the mystery was closer to being solved. But hope in Clearwater had started to come with a cost. Every false lead made the next one harder to believe. Detectives worked quietly in the background, checking phone records, interviewing ex-employees from the diner, even pulling traffic data from the nearest interstate toll plaza. Megan's car was never recorded anywhere. It was as if it vanished between 2 stoplights on a road everyone knew by heart. Through fall and into winter, the case went cold in every official sense. The flyers faded. The hotline, calls slowed. But one thing never changed: the porch light at the Ellis home, burning every night, visible from half a mile down the road. Linda told a reporter she'd keep it on until her daughter came home. What she didn't say was that some nights, She'd wake up convinced she heard a car pulling into the driveway, the crunch of gravel, the sound of a door opening only to find nothing there. By the 1-year mark, Clearwater had learned to live around the absence, though it never truly left. To strangers, Megan Ellis was just another unsolved missing person case. To the people who knew her, she was the girl who should have been home before midnight. And to her mother, she was still out there, somewhere between the diner lights and the dark water that no one dared to look into anymore. What no one realized then, not the detectives, not the volunteers, not even the people who whispered theories over coffee at the diner, was that the truth had been sitting beneath their feet all along, sealed away by time, silt, and silence. And one day, that silence would finally break. By the time a full year had passed since Megan Ellis disappeared, Clearwater had changed. The flyers were faded now, corners curled by rain. The diner where she'd worked tried to move on new staff. A fresh coat of paint, but her name still hung in the air like an unfinished sentence. The investigation, once sharp and urgent, had begun to scatter. In early 2010, detectives received what felt like their first real breakthrough. A woman in Illinois claimed she'd seen a girl who looked just like Megan waiting at a bus stop outside Springfield. She was quiet, nervous, clutching a backpack. The caller said the resemblance was uncanny, the same light brown hair, the same nervous smile. Detectives drove 6 hours that night, hoping against reason that the nightmare might end there. They showed Megan's photo around the area, talked to the bus driver, reviewed surveillance footage, but when they watched the tape, the girl's face wasn't Megan's at all, just a stranger who happened to look like her from a distance. It became a pattern. Every few weeks, a new tip came in. A man claimed to have seen her working at a roadside diner in Kentucky. Another caller, a trucker, swore he picked up a hitchhiker who matched her description near the Tennessee border. Each lead sparked a few days of hope, and then each one died the same way. No confirmation, no trace, nothing solid. Then came the strangest one of all. A jailhouse informant from a neighboring county contacted the sheriff's office with a story that made everyone pause. He said a man he'd shared a cell with bragged about keeping a girl locked up in a trailer outside Clearwater, describing her as young, wearing a red waitress uniform. Detectives took it seriously. They pulled old property records, searched every abandoned trailer within a 10-mile radius. They even brought dogs, but there was nothing, no signs of anyone having lived there in years. When they confronted the inmate, he admitted he'd made the whole thing up, hoping for a reduced sentence. Behind closed doors, investigators were exhausted. The sheriff's department had limited manpower. They relied heavily on the state task force that had come in months earlier. But tension between the two agencies grew fast. County deputies wanted to keep the focus local. They believed Megan's car had gone off the road somewhere close. The task force leaned toward abduction theories, convinced someone had picked her up that night. The disagreement slowed everything. Search warrants were delayed. Funding requests went unanswered. Leads got lost between case files. Meanwhile, the Ellis family was living in suspended time. Linda stopped sleeping in her bedroom. She stayed mostly in the living room, keeping her phone on the coffee table, waiting for a call that never came. Her son Daniel started volunteering with search and rescue groups across the state, trying to understand how people vanish so completely. He told a reporter once, "You start to realize missing doesn't mean gone. It just means no one's looking in the right place." In the spring of 2011, the case shifted again this time, because of pure accident. A local fisherman named Doug Hanley was out near Clearwater Creek, about 3 miles from Haven Quarry, when his line snagged on something heavy. Thinking it was debris, he waded in and found a rusted metal plate tangled in the weeds. It had faint lettering, almost unreadable, but when cleaned, the numbers became clear. It was a license plate Indiana 9YV384, Megan's plate. For the first time in 2 years, the investigation roared back to life. Dive teams returned to the area. Crews scanned every stretch of the creek, using sonar equipment borrowed from a neighboring county. They mapped the stream bed, looking for any metallic shapes that could indicate a submerged vehicle. But despite days of searching, the water gave up nothing. No car, no personal items, Just the same shifting silt and debris they'd seen before. Forensic experts examined the plate itself. The corrosion was advanced, making it impossible to determine how long it had been in the water. Some believed it had been detached from the car long after Megan disappeared, perhaps by current, perhaps by human hands. Others weren't so sure. The uncertainty only deepened the mystery. As months turned into years, the case file thickened with reports, theories, and contradictions. The state eventually classified Megan's disappearance under a grim new category: probable vehicular disappearance. It was a term used for cases where missing persons likely crashed into bodies of water that couldn't be searched safely. To Linda, it felt like a bureaucratic way of saying, "We've given up." In private, detectives admitted what everyone already feared. They'd done everything they could with the tools available. Without new evidence, there was nowhere left to go. By 2012, most of the original investigators had transferred or retired. A younger detective, Erin McCaffrey, took over the case. She reviewed the old files night after night, marking inconsistencies in red ink. In one report, she noticed something peculiar, an entry log showing that during the first week of the investigation, deputies had documented a fresh tire rut near the quarry fence line that was never followed up on. It was faint, half erased by rain, but still, it was something. Erin wanted to revisit it. When she brought the idea up in a meeting, the reaction was tepid. Funding was gone. The quarry still privately owned and off-limits without expensive permits. No one wanted to reopen old wounds. But Erin kept it in her notes, quietly convinced that if Megan's car was anywhere, it was near that quarry. Back at the Ellis home, the years left their mark. Paint chipped from the porch railings, the welcome mat faded under sun and rain. Yet one thing stayed the same: the porch light. Linda changed the bulb every few months, refusing to let it go dark. It became something of a local symbol. People driving past the house at night would glance at that single light and fall silent. There were moments when hope flickered back. Once, a group of volunteers raised enough money to bring in advanced sonar gear from Kentucky. They scanned Haven Quarry again in late 2013. This time, the readings showed several anomalies at the bottom, objects that might be vehicles. But once again, access issues stopped any recovery efforts. Officials said the site was unstable. The quarry had been filled with old machinery and chemicals decades ago. It wasn't safe to drain. The report was filed away, unread by most, and so the town moved on again. People stopped talking about Megan as much, though her photo still hung on a corkboard near the diner's register. A quiet reminder of the girl who never made it home. Still, for her mother, time didn't soften anything. Each passing year only deepened the silence. She'd go days without speaking to anyone. Her phone remained beside her bed every night, the ringer on high. She said it made her feel closer to her daughter somehow, as if keeping it there meant she was still reachable. By 2014, the Ellis case had become a kind of ghost in the department. Every new detective learned about it in passing, a warning about how easily something could slip through the cracks. The files were thick, disorganized, and filled with contradictions. Reports about sonar anomalies, unverified sightings, jailhouse rumors, and that rusted license plate that led nowhere. And yet, for all the dead ends, for all the silence and loss, one question lingered louder than ever. If Megan's car really had gone into the water that night, how had every search missed it? It was the kind of question that hung in the air for years, quiet, unanswered, waiting. And one day, long after most people stopped asking it, the quarry itself would finally start to give something back. Every case on this channel takes weeks of research, verification, and long nights chasing the truth, because these stories matter, and someone out there still deserves to be remembered. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind these mysteries, please like, subscribe, and share which part of today's case hit you the hardest. For more solved cold cases, check the links in the description below. Now, let's get back to the case. By 2015, most people in Clearwater had stopped mentioning Megan Ellis's name out loud. Her case had become one of those quiet tragedies that everyone remembered but no one talked about anymore. The flyers were long gone. Her missing person bulletin faded to a pale yellow on the corkboard inside the sheriff's office. The file box marked Ellis, M. sat on the bottom shelf of the evidence room, its label half peeled, its contents untouched for years. The sheriff who once led the investigation had retired, replaced by someone younger who inherited a stack of cold cases, Megan's included. The new detective, Erin McCaffrey, opened the file one morning and found herself staring at the first page, a photo of Megan at 19, smiling at something just outside the frame. The image looked dated now, like a window into another time. Erin flipped through the pages, tracing the case from the diner to Haven Quarry, from the tips and sonar scans to that rusted license plate that had led nowhere. It was all there, preserved like a story with no ending. For months, nothing changed. There were no new tips, no new sightings, no reason to believe the truth would ever surface. But then, in early spring, a message came in that felt different, quiet, unassuming, but specific. A man named Charles Dutton, a retired heavy equipment operator who'd worked at Haven Quarry decades earlier, had something he wanted to get off his chest. He told the sheriff's office that during a late-night shift sometime around 2009 or 2010, he'd seen something strange in the water while operating a floodlight crane. The light had caught a metallic reflection beneath the surface, something shaped like a car roof. He hadn't reported it then, afraid that admitting he'd been off route might cost him his job. But when he saw Megan's case resurface online, he couldn't shake the memory. Detective McCaffrey met him at his small house outside Clearwater. He was nervous, rubbing his palms on his jeans, insisting he wasn't looking for attention. "I didn't know what I was seeing," he said quietly. "But it's been in my head ever since. Same spot every time I drive past that quarry. I think there's something down there." It was the first tangible lead in years. McCaffrey requested permission to resurvey the site, but paperwork stalled the process. The quarry had changed hands several times now privately, owned by an out-of-state company that used it for runoff containment. Access was restricted, and excavation required costly permits. Still, McCaffrey didn't let it go. She reached out to a small volunteer dive group from neighboring counties, a non-profit specializing in cold water recovery called Midwest Search and Recovery. They agreed to help. By late summer, the team arrived in Clearwater with portable sonar units far more advanced than what investigators had used a decade earlier. They spent 2 days scanning Haven Quarry, methodically sweeping its depths. The readings came back unsettling. Beneath nearly 40 feet of murky water and silt, the sonar returned the shapes of multiple vehicles, at least 3 distinct outlines. 2 appeared heavily deteriorated, possibly decades old. But one shape stood out. It was smaller, compact, consistent with a mid-2000s sedan. The divers didn't have clearance to go down. The quarry walls were unstable, with loose rock that could collapse, without warning. The only option was to document what they'd found and turn it over to law enforcement. When McCaffrey reviewed the sonar images, her stomach tightened. The contours of the smaller vehicle were unmistakable: the sloping roofline, the narrow body, the faint shadow of an open driver's window. She didn't say it out loud, but she knew what it looked like. The sheriff's office issued a statement acknowledging the discovery but cautioned that it could take months, maybe years, to secure permission for a recovery operation. Officials cited environmental concerns, private ownership, and liability risks. To the Ellis family, it sounded like another excuse. They'd heard variations of that same explanation before: unsafe terrain, unclear property rights, lack of funds. Every reason felt like another wall between them and the truth. Local media picked up the story, reigniting old memories. Reporters interviewed residents who remembered the original search in 2009, many of them now older, with grayer hair and quieter voices. One man said, "We always knew it was that quarry. We just couldn't prove it." Another added, "That road takes people. Always has." The coverage brought temporary attention back to the case, but within weeks, the noise faded again. For Linda Ellis, it was a painful loop she couldn't escape. When she saw the new sonar images online, she stared at them for hours, tracing the outlines on her computer screen as if they might change under her fingertips. She didn't need confirmation. In her mind, She already knew. She printed one of the sonar stills and taped it beside Megan's photograph in the living room. When a reporter asked if she believed this was finally her daughter's car, she said, "I believed it the first time they searched that water. I just needed someone else to see it too." Weeks passed, and nothing happened. The quarry remained sealed off. The state declined to intervene, citing lack of immediate evidence of a crime. The volunteer group offered to fund their own recovery, but insurance regulations blocked it. Everyone involved seemed to hit the same dead ends, the same slow bureaucracy that had haunted the case for years. In Clearwater, the renewed attention stirred old guilt. Residents who had once searched those woods remembered the nights they'd given up, the times they'd thought it was hopeless. A few locals even returned to the quarry fence line, standing quietly at dusk, looking out over the still water. The place was silent except for the soft hum of cicadas and the distant echo of trucks passing on Highway 47. Somewhere beneath that black water, something metallic slept under the mud just out of reach, just close enough to remind everyone it was still there. Detective McCaffrey kept the case active on her desk. She sent the sonar data to state analysts, hoping for a technical review, but it went unanswered for months. In the meantime, she made a habit of driving out to the quarry after shifts, parking along the fence, and staring into the dark water. She once told a colleague it felt like the whole town had built its life around forgetting, and she didn't want to be part of that. By winter, another season had passed without progress. Snow blanketed Clearwater, muting everything under its weight. Linda's porch light still burned, a small circle of yellow in the cold. She changed the bulb every few weeks, even when it didn't need changing. When asked why, she said softly, "It's the only thing that doesn't fade." In the sheriff's office, Megan's file was moved from the bottom shelf to McCaffrey's desk again. The case had gone quiet once more, but the new sonar images were impossible to ignore. Someone, someday, would have to go back into that water. And when they did, the truth waiting beneath the surface wouldn't just belong to one family. It would belong to everyone who'd ever looked at that stretch of road and wondered how a person and an entire car could simply disappear. By the summer of 2023, Clearwater had nearly forgotten about the old quarry. It was fenced off and overgrown, a relic of the town's industrial past, visited now only by geologists, inspectors, or the occasional teenager sneaking in after dark. For most people, it had faded into the background, a dangerous, forgotten place that time had sealed away. But that summer, something changed. The county health department announced that Haven Quarry would undergo a partial drainage due to groundwater contamination. For the first time in decades, the water that had hidden its secrets was going to be lowered, layer by layer. At first, no one thought twice about it. The drainage was routine, part of an environmental cleanup project. But as the weeks passed and the water line dropped, locals started gathering near the fence, curious to see what the quarry had been hiding. The first signs were small rusted machinery poking through the mud, the twisted remains of an old mining cart. Then, one morning in late July, a worker noticed something buried deeper in the silt, a curved line of metal just barely visible beneath the surface, catching the sunlight. When the water receded further, the shape became unmistakable. A car roof. Authorities were called immediately. Within hours, the area was sealed off with tape. Deputies from the Clearwater Sheriff's Office arrived, followed by forensic investigators from the state police. The crowd that gathered along the fence stayed quiet, staring down into the drained quarry as a crane began pulling the object from the water. It came up slowly, coated in mud and algae, every surface bent and corroded by years of pressure. As it turned, the light hit what remained of the license plate, still barely legible through the rust, 9YV384. The same number that had haunted the Ellis family for 14 years. Inside the vehicle, investigators could already see the faint outlines of human remains in the driver's seat. The body was skeletal, still belted in, with fragments of clothing clinging to the frame. A thin embroidered patch on the shirt, faded but intact, read, "Megan." The news spread through Clearwater in minutes. Residents who had long given up on ever knowing the truth began calling one another, some crying, others simply stunned. For Linda Ellis, the moment came when a deputy knocked on her door that evening. She didn't need him to speak. She said later that she could tell from the way he held his hat in his hands. The car was identified as a 2003 Pontiac Sunfire, the same model and color Megan drove. Serial numbers confirmed it beyond doubt. But what investigators wanted was to understand how it had ended up there, and why every search, every dive, every sonar sweep had missed it. Forensic teams began a slow, methodical process of examining the wreckage. The car had come to rest nose first, wedged between rocks at the bottom of a steep incline. Its windows were gone, glass scattered through the sediment. The frame was heavily corroded, but certain details remained eerily preserved. The driver's side door was sealed shut by impact. The passenger side had caved inward. On the floorboard, near the pedals, was a keychain shaped like a small silver heart. Her family confirmed it had been Megan's. Investigators also recovered several personal items: an ID badge from the Clearwater Diner, a faded photograph of Megan and her younger brother, and the remains of a cell phone, waterlogged beyond repair. But perhaps the most revealing discovery came from the car's event data recorder, the onboard system that logged vehicle activity in the final seconds before a crash. Against all odds, it had survived. When technicians downloaded the data, they found that the car had been traveling at approximately 38 miles per hour before losing traction on a wet surface. The brakes were applied for less than a second before impact. There were no signs of evasive steering, no second set of tire marks, meaning Megan had likely driven straight off the narrow service road that bordered the quarry. Investigators theorized that heavy rain that night had reduced visibility to almost zero. Without guardrails or warning signs, the edge of the quarry would have looked like just another turn in the darkness. It wasn't foul play. It wasn't a mystery someone could solve. It was a tragic accident, simple, cruel, and hidden by geography and time. Further analysis reconstructed the sequence of events that night. Sometime around 10:45 p.m., Megan clocked out from the diner. Records showed light rain beginning around 10:50, intensifying quickly. On her usual route home, she would have taken Highway 47, but that night, for reasons no one could determine, she took the back service road instead. Perhaps she was trying to avoid traffic. Perhaps she'd taken the shortcut before and trusted it. The road itself was a hazard: gravel shoulders, uneven grading, and a blind curve that sloped downward toward the quarry. In 2009, it had no barriers, no reflective markers. Investigators believe her headlights reflected against wet pavement, making it impossible to distinguish the road's end from open air. When her front tires hit loose gravel, the car slid off the edge and plunged almost 60 feet into the quarry below. Impact testing showed that the vehicle would have sunk within 30 seconds. With the windows closed and the seatbelt still fastened, Megan likely never escaped. The autopsy confirmed she had died instantly from blunt force trauma before the water could take her. What stunned everyone most was proximity. When officials mapped the accident site, they realized the edge where she'd gone off the road was less than 200 yards from the diner's rear exit, the very place where she'd worked her last shift. For 14 years, her car had been right there, hidden under brush and water, invisible to every search, every sonar sweep that had stopped just short of that corner. Reporters called it cruel irony. Investigators called it an oversight of landscape and luck. But for her mother, it was something else entirely, a cruel form of stillness. For years she'd looked in every direction except the one closest to where her daughter had last been alive. Over the next week, forensic experts completed the identification using dental records and DNA confirmation from Megan's hairbrush. Her remains were released to the family quietly, without ceremony, and a small service was held at Clearwater Cemetery. Only close friends, a few officers, and members of the search and recovery team attended. Linda placed the same photograph that had once hung on her refrigerator beside the urn. She said she finally felt she could bring her daughter home. For Detective McCaffrey, the discovery brought relief and regret in equal measure. Relief that the truth had finally surfaced. Regret that it had taken 14 years, and that technology and persistence, not luck, had been the only things missing all along. She spent the following week reviewing old dive reports and realized that every prior sonar sweep had stopped 30 feet short of the crash site because of restricted access near the quarry's drainage channel. Megan's car had been just beyond that limit, missed not by incompetence, but by a line on a map. The case was officially closed in August 2023, labeled as an accidental vehicular submersion. But the word closure felt hollow in Clearwater. There was no satisfaction in the ending, no justice, just a small town reminded that sometimes the truth waits in silence until the world changes enough to see it. When reporters asked Linda how she felt, she said, "I never stopped believing she was there. I just didn't know how close." And in that single sentence, she captured what the entire town had felt for years, that the answers were never far away, only hidden beneath the quiet surface of ordinary life, waiting for time to pull them back up. For 14 years, the truth had been there all along, hidden just beneath the surface of the water that everyone in Clearwater had passed by 1,000 times. It wasn't buried in conspiracy or malice, just in the quiet blindness of circumstance. The case that had once consumed the town turned out to be exactly what no one wanted to believe: a tragic accident, sealed off by silt, time, and human error. When the official report came out, it was short. Manner of death, accidental. Cause, blunt force trauma consistent with vehicular submersion. To investigators, it closed the file. To the Ellis family, it only deepened the ache. It meant there had never been a villain. No single person to blame, only a series of missed chances, an outdated sonar sweep that stopped too early, a search grid drawn a few feet too short, a dark and rainy night that erased all visibility. Detective McCaffrey spoke quietly about it later, admitting that the answers had likely been waiting within reach for years. "If we'd had modern sonar back then," she said, "we would have found her in days, not decades." That admission stung the entire department. It forced everyone to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes it isn't evil or mystery that hides people, but simple, crushing oversight. Clearwater was a small town. People knew every bump in the road, every family story. But after Megan's car was pulled from that quarry, it changed the way locals looked at their surroundings. Places that once felt ordinary suddenly carried weight. The diner where she'd worked still operated under new ownership, but the staff said it felt different now. The regulars still sat at the same corner booths, yet when the rain came down hard, the whole place grew quieter, as if the town itself remembered. For Megan's mother, closure wasn't relief, it was reality, setting in. After the funeral, she returned home to a house that felt hollow without waiting. The porch light that had burned every night since 2009 stayed on for a few more weeks, until one evening she stood in the doorway, staring at it, and simply turned it off. She told a neighbor later that she didn't do it out of peace, but because she realized her daughter had never needed it. She'd been home all along, just in a place no one could see. The community held a candlelight vigil near Haven Quarry not long after the discovery. Dozens of people came, former classmates, old co-workers, the volunteers who had searched the woods years earlier. They stood along the fence line, each holding a small light that reflected off the surface of the water, now partially drained. A pastor read a short message about faith and endurance, but most people just stood in silence. It wasn't mourning in the traditional sense, it was something quieter, more reflective. A town remembering how easily someone could vanish into the dark, and how long it could take to find the truth again. The quarry was eventually sealed off for good. The land was purchased by the county, and signs were posted warning against trespassing. But for months afterward, people would still drive by and slow down at the curve on Haven Quarry Road, the one Megan likely took that night. Some left flowers. Others just sat for a while, engines idling, headlights reflecting off the guardrails that had finally been installed years too late. Investigators conducted a final review of the case for internal purposes. The conclusion was sobering. Every misstep from the limited dive range in 2009 to the delayed sonar expansion years later had been documented. One note in the final file read, "Had modern recovery technology been available, the vehicle would have been located within the first 72 hours. It wasn't negligence. It wasn't incompetence. It was just the reality of small-town resources at a time when technology hadn't yet caught up to the scale of loss. For months, reporters covered the story as a case finally solved, but those who had lived through it knew it wasn't the kind of ending you celebrated. It was the kind that left you quiet afterward. There were no arrests, no justice, only the dull ache of understanding what really happened. The narrative that had once spun theories of kidnapping and foul play had unraveled into something painfully human. A wrong turn, a dark night, and a road without guardrails. Detective McCaffrey stayed with the department another year before transferring to the State Missing Persons Unit. She said Megan's case changed how she approached every file that crossed her desk. She started pushing for sonar scans to be standard in any disappearance near bodies of water. Her colleagues said she never spoke of the Ellis case directly again, but she kept a photo from the quarry pinned behind her desk, a reminder of what it meant to look too late. In Clearwater, life moved forward in slow, careful steps. Linda Ellis became an advocate for cold case reform, urging neighboring counties to revisit their unsolved files. She told anyone who would listen that she didn't want another mother to sit by a window for 14 years, waiting for a phone call that would never come. People described her as quiet but steady, carrying grief not as a wound but as a weight she'd learned to bear. As seasons passed, the story faded from headlines again. The diner remodeled, the quarry fence rusted, and new families moved into the neighborhood never knowing what had once haunted those streets. But for those who remembered, the case of Megan Ellis became something more than tragedy. It became a lesson carved into the collective conscience of the town. A reminder that closure isn't always justice, and that sometimes the smallest missteps can keep the truth hidden for years. When investigators compiled a regional report later that year, Megan's name appeared alongside dozens of others, men and women still missing from nearby counties, some for decades. Many had likely met the same fate. A skid on wet asphalt, a blind corner, an unseen drop. The report ended with a single sentence: recovered through environmental drainage. It sounded sterile, but in that phrasing lay an entire story, the idea that time itself had to drain before the truth could surface. Today, people driving along Highway 47 still pass the stretch near Haven Quarry. The road has new guardrails now, reflective signs warning drivers to slow down before the curve. But on certain rainy nights, locals say the fog sits heavy there, and the water below ripples in patterns that seem oddly alive. They don't talk about ghosts in Clearwater. They talk about memory, how it lingers in the places we forget to look. And in the end, Megan's story became a symbol for every unanswered question that still lingers in the tensed region. Her case proved that even when everything feels lost, the truth doesn't disappear, it just waits, patient and silent, for the day when the light finally reaches deep enough to find it.